Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. As I have been doing, I'm going to, or as I had been doing, stepped away from for a moment and am returning to, going to specifically go into some historical resources to continue to show where I get ideas from or where I get my understanding from and why it is the way it is. So instead of simply repeating things that I say, helping backtrack through these things. So when I say that osteopathy does good work, but the stories have challenges, when I say that the mechanistic claims have issues, right? So osteopathic practitioners do good stuff, just not necessarily what they say they do. When I say things like essentially personal empiricism, so individual empiricism, or the things that I experience and interpret in the way that I do, that's what it is. So I will teach people those things, I will teach people my interpretations, and that will propagate down throughout the profession such that it's cultural education or cultural indoctrination as opposed to proper rigorous investigation of mechanism or method, right? So to set the stage there, to just generally say, I've made arguments in the past, to try to walk back through them, to show areas where early writing and early osteopathic references or resources allow me to make the claims that I make. Now, granted, my interpretation may be off, my interpretation may not necessarily be exactly what the writer was intending. That's all built-in flaws to doing anything like this, but to at least attempt to show these things. So the thing that I want to specifically look at today are quotes directly from Dr. Still's books, where he sort of sets the stage for him as an individual to not necessarily be as accurate as one may hope if they're trying to assay his claims. So he specifically notes how he has gone through life and how he remembers things, or at least the manner in which he does that or approaches that. So I'll read these quotes and provide commentary as I go, just to note superficially that when you're looking at what Dr. Still says, it is worth considering that he doesn't claim to be perfectly accurate. He doesn't claim to have kept good records. He just claims that this is what he remembers. Unfortunately, memory has errors, memory has flaws for a variety of reasons. Some memories are pretty good, some memories are not so good. It's hard to know. We have the written record, we don't have the person or access to their experiences in the form of Dr. Still, unfortunately. So to read the first one, this is from Dr. Still's autobiography, and I'll read the quote. I will inform the reader at the outset that this book is written to state facts without being confined to the exact dates and figures. Events that have made lasting impressions on my mind, stated as correctly as possible from memory, are narrated here without regard to the rules of fine writing. So to pause briefly, when I note that Edith Ashmore basically gives an homage to Dr. Still with no allusions to fine writing, this is in the autobiography, and we'll see probably a little bit of this. I don't remember directly offhand the details of each quote, but I think we'll see this in some of the other quotes that I have here to get back into reading. I never kept any notes of my life, therefore the stories may appear disconnected. When I tell you of an event, it will be the truth as I remember it, regardless of how it may look in print. I want to avoid biography as I write for the reason that biographies are so nicely worded that the reader often has to ask whom the narrator is giving a write-up. Notwithstanding, I am often told that I ought to get a professional biographer to take my life. I have concluded to reserve it for myself. Okay, so at least in the context of the autobiography of A.T. Still, he's not necessarily speaking about clinical things or technical things, speaking more about his life, but he obviously includes how he got to the concept of osteopathy, how he discovered it instead of created it. He wasn't the founder, he was the discoverer. He is saying that he didn't keep particularly accurate notes and that he's going to tell it the way he wants to. So there's, at least superficially with respect to stories of his life, not necessarily his osteopathic work, but at least with respect to his life, we get him noting that he wasn't maybe the best note keeper or the best recorder of things. So it allows us to import that to some degree and to keep a keen eye out for where Dr. Still is saying things that one would hope are accurate, maybe he has a general pattern of not recording things accurately so that he may report them accurately in the future. Now, I do want to note that just because somebody writes something down in a particular way doesn't mean it's an accurate representation of the reality that occurred. It means it's the way that they recorded it for whatever set of reasons that they recorded it. There is a concept that I'd like to bring in. The map is not the territory. So I hear this usually from a mathematician named Eric Weinstein. When he notes that the map is not the territory, you can have an accurate map. It's a representation of something. It isn't the thing itself. So math is a representation of a physical reality, or an attempted representation. A map in and of itself is an attempted physical representation of something else. Excuse me. There are things like topographical maps, so they're overviews and they tell you general elevation at particular points, so you kind of have an idea of what to expect, but it doesn't tell you how you're going to have to physically interface with that thing. It just gives you an expectation of what it's going to be like, as opposed to being the thing itself. So writing, unfortunately, is not the event. It is the recording of the event based on the variety of factors that went into it being recorded that way. That's why if you can have multiple pieces of writing about a particular thing, it often is useful because you can kind of coordinate what's the same between those writings or those written records. And you can have greater confidence in certain things and lower confidence in other things, because the things that people agree on seem to be those things that you can have higher confidence in, and the disagreements are those things you can have lower confidence in. So just minor break there. Instead of simply being critical of the likely accuracy of what Dr. Still says, to note that there is an issue with written records, period, because they are what was written down instead of the thing itself. So they're at best proxy representations for what may or may not have occurred. Okay, so now I'm going to read another quote from Research and Practice. I have omitted all cuts and pictures because the reader of my practice is supposed to have in his mind an image of every bone, muscle, nerve, organ, and part of the human body. His thorough anatomical and physiological acquaintance with the body makes it useless to have illustrations in this work. On your table are fully illustrated works on anatomy by able authors. So I'll pause for a moment. He's at least giving us the opportunity to interpret that there are standardized anatomical texts, but each individual is different, so you should really be paying attention to the individual. That may not be the intention, but at least gives us the opportunity to have that interpretation, instead of saying, look, here's a picture of the anatomy. Well, you should already know the standardized anatomy. But then when you go to your patients, you should be paying attention to them as opposed to the standardized anatomy. There's a little bit of waffling on that, because Dr. Still does talk about you should have the picture of all of the anatomy in your mind at all times. So there's an issue in that abstraction is an assumed abstraction, because not every individual is internally the same. We can also know that every individual is not externally the same. So that normalized picture of anatomy may have errors in it that could impact how you behave in relation to that person. Whereas if you pay attention to that person as accurately as possible and how they respond to what you do, you're probably more accurate. So that's just some commentary to read again. Keep well posted on anatomy, because the osteopath reasons from his mechanical knowledge of anatomy. I've quoted many definitions from Douglason's and Dorland's latest words. We consider them standard authorities, and herewith give them credit and thanks. I have given you from my many years of experience and observation what I consider some of the underlying causes of these so-called diseases, which are seen as effects in the different regions of the body, together with my method of treating such causes. Okay, so the key part there with respect to what I'm pointing to is I have given you from my many years of experience and observation what I consider some of the underlying causes of these so-called diseases. So he is telling you what he thinks it is, not necessarily what many people have worked on and attempted to generate confidence in agreeing about. So not necessarily consensus, but at least coordination and working together to say, okay, regardless of who's looking at this, this is what we find. So this is much more personal. This is much more about what he thinks and what he has put together. So individual empiricism, the value of what I observe and interpret, is at least mildly shown here. So again, that may not necessarily be his intention. That is my extrapolation by reading many of the things he's written. So to move on to, so for the first book, Autobiography, 1899, maybe it was 97. Anyways, the version that I have access to is 1899. No, it's in 97. It's 1897. I'm going crazy. Anyways, first book was Autobiography. Last book was Research and Practice. So I went Autobiography, Research and Practice. So as far as the temporal lineage or the temporal representation, I'm a little out of order. But again, we're trying to establish a pattern, or at least point to a pattern that could be established, as opposed to saying this is definitely it. Anyways, the next two books are the middle two books, which is Philosophy of Osteopathy and Philosophy and Mechanical Principles of Osteopathy. So to read, again, from Philosophy of Osteopathy, which is 1899, the book has been written by myself in my own way without any ambition to fine writing, but to give the world a start in a philosophy that may be a guide in the future. So again, to pause for a moment, Edith Ashmore making homage to Dr. Still as seen in that. The book has been written by myself in my own way without any ambition to fine writing. So Ashmore, when you look at her textbook, pays homage to that. Owing to the great haste with which the book has been rushed through the press to meet the urgent demand, we will ask the indulgence of the public for any imperfection that may appear, hoping that the world may profit by these thoughts. I am respectfully, A.T. Still. Kirksville, Missouri, September 1st, 1899. So again, acknowledgement that accuracy may be a challenge with what's written down. So Still is at least acknowledging that he is aware that there could be errors in what has been written, which is probably just good general behavior, saying, hey, I may have made a mistake. We can go back and correct it later. Thank you for indulging those errors. The errors are important because they are the places that if we can identify the error, we can learn. Right? So again, a general pattern seems to be able to be argued for, that still acknowledged that there was challenges with the accuracy of what he said, or at least possible challenges to the accuracy. Okay, so to read again, Philosophy and Mechanical Principles of Osteopathy. This is the preface. In taking up a pen at my age and assuming the responsibility of writing a book on the causes and treatment of diseases, philosophically and in a comprehensible manner with words and forms to meet the demands of this enlightened age, I feel it is a very great undertaking and ask the world, give me its friendly criticism, read and adopt or reject as you may feel disposed when you have perused what I may write. I start out on this journey alone with no compass except my reason, and if I fail, no one will suffer for the trip excepting myself. ATS, January 1st, 1902. So the acknowledgement that a lot of it is individual. So a lot of what he's going to write is dependent on him. So he's acknowledging to some degree, whether he knew the term or not, because he probably didn't. I don't even know if the term was properly coined as far as epistemologies are concerned, or theories of knowledge or knowledge creation. The questions to be answered by epistemology are what can be known, how can it be known, and who can it be known by. Constructivism is that epistemology which is dependent on the individual, their previous experiences, and the current environment of observation. So Still is at least somewhat pointing in that direction, that what I'm writing is what I found and what I've interpreted. And there may be issues with it, so he encourages you to, quote, read and adopt or reject as you may feel disposed when you have perused what I may write. And then the way in which he's saying that it's his interpretation is the next sentence. And again, to read the quote, to reinforce, I start out on this journey alone with no compass except my reason, and if I fail, no one will suffer for the trip excepting myself. So he is definitely acknowledging multiple times that what he is writing is dependent on him and his experience. So we then are able to import what he says in Autobiography about his possible behavior pattern of not recording things as accurately as one may like. He definitely had general resistance to the desire to talk about techniques, because as far as he was concerned, if you had the knowledge of anatomy that would then generate how you could reason for why a mechanical disruption would lead to the effects that were observable, either the symptoms that only the patient could identify and report, or the signs where the patient and a practitioner or anybody else could, in many circumstances, identify and report. Either way, if there was a mechanical relationship between those things, if you found the thing that wasn't moving well and you impacted it and the thing, either the sign or the symptom changed, then you could have, through anatomy, the ability to explain that. That was his general take. And if you read philosophy of osteopathy and philosophy of mechanical principles, there is not a technique to be found. There is a lot of waxing poetic on anatomy and using analogy. When you get into research and practice, he talks about specific methods, but really the bulk of research and practice is him saying the anatomy's here, therefore, hey, let's go ahead and find whatever's not working and do something about it. He does provide some technical suggestions, but he also in that one notes that there's not everybody's technique should look the same, and as long as you get the result, whatever. So if you know your anatomy, you should be able to look for the things that aren't moving. When you find the things that aren't moving, work on them. If when you move them better, that changes, then you've established a mechanical relationship between health and disease states, right? So another way to say that is find it, fix it, leave it alone. Nature will kindly take care of the rest. But again, the pattern is that still acknowledges errors or the possibility of errors, acknowledges as a general pattern, if we put this all together, this may not have been something he intended to do, but he acknowledges that he didn't necessarily have a behavioral preference for it being exceptionally accurate. He's like, yeah, it's kind of like this. He didn't like talking about technical skills. Part of the reason may be that he was not the first person to write a book on osteopathy. It was E.D. Barber, and E.D. Barber's book was essentially class notes. So there's a period of time, apparently, when Dr. Still was doing the bulk of the teaching, he banned note-taking, because if you look at the pictures in Barber's first book, they look like sketches of Dr. Still demonstrating technique, which in all likelihood they could have been, either from the moment or from memory. So E.D. Barber writing that first book and then still hoping that he could teach in the abstract, say, just know anatomy and you'll know what to do. Versus the reality, unfortunately, of teaching is that what you need to do is note the abstraction, the thing that's always there, but the details will change, and then provide multiple examples of the details. Still didn't seem to like to do that. He seemed to like to just focus on the abstraction because internally to him, that's how he felt he did it. Whereas the students are like, well, we need some technical demonstration of what you're talking about. So by the time you get to research and practice, it seems like he was responding to that pressure and providing some verbal or written description of the technical methods. So when we read stuff about Dr. Still, not about Dr. Still, rather that Dr. Still wrote, keeping all of this stuff in mind, his likely behavioral pattern of not being as accurate as one would hope, his acknowledgement, and if you go through especially research and practice and the other books, the philosophy of osteopathy and philosophy of mechanical principles, he does note that if he didn't get things in enough time, he probably couldn't help them. So he did acknowledge that there was a limit. He also talks about, osteopathy is only at its short tide. We'll find out what it can do over time. Not a perfect quote, but a generalized concept that I think that's in research and practice. So we get the general pattern that still acknowledged that there were limits, not clearly, but he did generally acknowledge that there were limits to what hands-on osteopathy could do. He did talk about once you got to the limit of what the hands-on methods could do or the mechanical methods could do, surgery was but an extension of osteopathy. Again, the general pattern is when you read Still, you're not reading clear, explicit instruction. You're reading abstraction that should ideally be able to point you towards physical action. He did a bad job of teaching physical action, as it would seem, because he didn't understand the phenomenon of when you're trying to treat a general abstraction or a framework, that you need to provide as many examples as possible to show how it's the same thing, but the details are different, right? So you show the details and how they relate to the thing, that deep feature, that abstraction, that problem-solving scheme, that problem-solving framework, the causal plot in the story, or the mental model that somebody individually will develop over time. So when reading Still, be very cautious. to not take what he's saying at direct face value. He's trying to talk about how he thinks his mind functions to get to the physical behaviors and real world mechanical solutions. Because again, that's what it seems like he's telling us. He thinks the way he functions, or he thinks that's the way he functions, and that's what he's trying to tell us. That may not necessarily be the way he actually functioned, but it's the written record we have. So be cautious when reading Still, because accuracy is questionable, and also he preferred abstraction as opposed to concrete instruction. It may be that he liked the abstraction more than the concrete instruction because he was concerned that if he taught people step-by-step movements, they wouldn't be able to alter them when faced with the need to alter them. My approach to that is to use the heuristics that I talk about, or the problem-solving frameworks that allow for the decisions that allow for the generation of a set of solutions to test between, as opposed to algorithmic instructions, which are a step-by-step set of instructions that claim to provide a guaranteed solution. Humans are variable enough that we need possible solutions to test between as opposed to a guaranteed solution. So the thing that's always there, at least in the framework that I will attempt to deliver, are the heuristics, aka the decision points, or the questions that allow you to make decisions. And the details will vary. So when we teach from the framework, and we say develop a detail within this box. So generate a patient active treatment for the neck where the head stays relatively still and the torso moves. Make it patient active, make it patient passive. Put somebody in supine, generate a solution for how to work on the neck where the head and neck stay relatively still and the torso moves, and make it patient active and patient passive. So we've got decision points. Then we have the students generate those approaches, test between them, test between positions, so that they learn how to generate the details that relate to the heuristic, which is the abstraction that's always there, or the deep feature that's always there, but the details will change. So again, just to reiterate, when reading Dr. Still, don't take it at absolute face value. He's trying to teach you an abstraction so that you can generate the details. That seems to be his common refrain. By the time you get to research and practice, he's trying to tell you some details, but he's also saying, hey, generally when I find anything that's in the head, I treat more or less the neck up, primarily the neck. Sometimes I go all the way down to the 5th thoracic vertebrae or the 8th thoracic vertebrae. Why? Well, I don't know. Blood flow, nerves, blah, 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 blah. You'll have some possible anatomical explanation that you can put in after, but basically Still's general refrain, if you abstract it enough and you read enough of what he writes, hey, wherever there's a problem, where something's not moving, work on the thing that's not moving, get it moving so that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and whatever internal processes related to that should correct itself as long as it hasn't been going on too long. That can be turned into osteopathy fundamentally believes there's a mechanical relationship between health and disease states. So wherever you find the thing that's not moving, wherever you find the friction, because you're an engineer, the engineer knows to remove the friction and all things will then function as they are supposed to, as long as they are not so far disrupted that they cannot return to normal function. So Still would, again, acknowledge that if you didn't get something in time, you couldn't fix it the right way. The removal of the friction wouldn't make it work right. So to reiterate once again, reading Dr. Still, don't take it at face value. He's teaching you an abstraction. You have to build the detail on top of it. There are themes, there are things that seem to be patterns that you can find if you look at it enough, but use it to build upon, as if he's saying to you, these are the patterns, find where it's not moving, work on it. That's really all that you can get. You can get technical details of maybe his preferences, but he already acknowledges in a variety of ways that there's many ways to do it. So be careful with saying, this is what Dr. Still said, this is the move that I'm going to do because Dr. Still did it and it works. So when the hip is doing this, I'm going to do Dr. Still's hip move and it's going to be perfect. No, it's not going to be perfect. It's just a method he describes. If you can abstract the things that are always there in all of the methods he describes, then you've got something. He at least points you in the direction of lever, wedge, and screw, right? So twist things, wedge things, and make sure that you can separate them, right? So you can view that in a variety of ways, with what you do with your hand, with what you do with the table, with what you do with your body contact with the patient, with whether or not you stand the patient and put them against a door jamb or a kind of like a door frame. There's a variety of ways to do it. The way to abstract from that is relational motion. Whatever he talks about treating, he tells you what should move and what should stay still. He may not tell it to you explicitly because he didn't formulate it that way, but he tells you, make sure that this thing is wedged, aka the thing above is staying still and the thing below is moving, right? So you can abstract that from what Dr. Still says and then use that to build the details upon. Okay? So he didn't want to tell you how to do things. There is a quote where I can't remember which book it is, but it's like, I'm not going to tell the student to punch or pull this bone. So I'm going to tell you go find where it's not moving and work on it. Okay? So hopefully you've learned something from that. Thank you for sticking around this long. We'll talk again soon.